Hey everybody. Well, a little bit odd to be doing a class this way, and we did a couple of times last semester. With a few things that came up, but yeah, weird, wild, wacky times that we're in, but we're gonna make it through. God's good. Jesus is faithful, and so we're gonna continue to keep on keeping on, to hold on to hope, and to hold on to the Jesus who gives us that hope. So, what I do want to do this morning is to be able to pray. Some of you guys have sent in some prayer requests and some sent some stuff my way, and I'll be responding to that shortly. But if you do have any requests, go ahead and let me know. That's one of the things I do want to bring up is for us to stay connected. Send me an email, shoot me a text, and we'll chop it up and stay connected. Maybe we'll do some Facebook lives and send around some memes. I don't know. We'll just do something to stay connected again to keep it while keeping it light. And I know it's a serious time, but again, that the important part is to be connected, not just as a school community, but then also just as a community in general. We've had a lot of good time in class, and I don't want to lose out on that because of the current situation that we're facing. So, yeah, let's stay connected. So let's go ahead and pray for this morning, and then we'll jump into it. Father, thank you so much for all that you're doing in our lives, Lord, through this wacky time that we're in right now. Lord, would you speak to us during this time of us kind of forcefully being slowed down and some of the processes just having a monkey wrench thrown in them? Lord, would you help us? Would you give us strength and give us your peace that we might be able to continue to pursue what it is that you would have us here to do? And so, Lord, be with us. And Lord, tend to the things that uh, you've given us, Lord, and be with our families, be with our friends, and tend to them as we tend to the work that you've given us to do. Lord, Holy Spirit, would you continue to teach us and to be with us and empower us towards your calling, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so here we go. Last class, we had talked about Exodus, and we had left off on what was happening near the end of Exodus, and specifically with tabernacle. And tabernacle, as you guys see on your first slides there on the PowerPoint, that tabernacle is this kind of body of God, if you will. That it's this present, the symbol of presence that God is now with his people, which tells us to go back to Genesis 1 and 2, where God is present with those first humans. And so with those first humans, that God is present in unbroken relationship. And then we see Genesis where a bit of a fallout, not just fall, but a fallout, and this change in relationship and how God is ever pursuing to reestablish this relationship with his people. What we see with tabernacle is this kind of this presence that is demonstrated in this movable tent that God, like I've said it before and I'll say it again, that God doesn't attach himself to a place, but rather to a people. That God doesn't attach himself just to a place, but rather to a people. And now these newly released Hebrew slaves that are going to be formed into a people through the Mosaic covenant, the Ten Commandments, the 10 words, this teaching, this Torah that's now going to shape them of how to live in relationship with Yahweh. That the tabernacle represents for them the presence of God now restored to them. And mind you, what we just came off of in Exodus 32, with seeing the rupturing relationship already happening, how God's going to reestablish that relationship in the restoring of the new commandments with the rebuilding, the kind of second go around on the second set of stone, and now with the presence filling up this tabernacle. And that God is going to be present as this Holy One. And we're going to talk about later what does it mean, what does holiness mean in the Old Testament as it relates to God and as it relates to people, and how God's going to move into their space. He's going to move into Israel's space as they're going to be moving around, where God's going to be in the center of the encampment. And all the people are going to be gathered around him. And so we see Israel going to be followers of a God who himself is on a move from Egypt up to Canaan, which we're going to see some settling later on when the people start to settle there, which is, again, beyond this class. It's going to be more Judges and Joshua. But again, that once we get there, you'll start seeing some of the settling. We'll get to right before that in Deuteronomy. So before we get there, we're going to go through a few things with Leviticus specifically. That Hebrew name Vayikra, which is, and he Yahweh summoned, and that's going to be in regards to summoning the people. And so that Vav consecutive is just a continuation from Exodus, this unbroken. We have Exodus, which is going to form part one, and then um, Leviticus is going to form part two, and we're going to see with Numbers is kind of a part three. So these continuations between the books is going to let us know that this is one continuous story of what's happening in Exodus is now kind of being brought over in the continuation of the events that are happening in Leviticus. And so remember, Exodus is going to begin with, again, another Vav, which is going to be an and, which continues over from Genesis. So again, this continuation of an unbroken narrative, even if it's broken up in our Bibles. And so the setting for this one is going to be in Mount Sinai, which is going to be about a year after Israel is going to leave Egypt. So they're about a year out. Obviously, some stuff's already happened um, with the golden calf and all that situation that's gone on. So they're traveling out of Egypt. Authorship is believed to be Moses and a few other hands that are going to be in there for editors, and we've talked about that before. And so Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers are going to have a lot of the same content. But because they have so much shared content that it's not any reason to just gloss over it or just flip to the other side to try to see what's on the other side, but to really see why is this being repeated. And we're going to talk through a little bit of why that's going to be there. Again, the repetition is there for a reason. It's not arbitrary. And so the book of Leviticus, the way it's going to be laid out, it's going to have 6 major sections. It's going to be sacrifice and worship for the first one, the dedication of the temple and the priests for chapters 8 through 10, ritual purity, chapters 11 through 15, regulations for the Day of Atonement, chapter 16, holiness code, chapters 17 through 26, which is going to take up a huge chunk, and there's going to be a reason for that, and we'll talk about it in a little bit. And laws on tithes and offerings, which is going to be chapter 27. So yeah, that's going to be setting that up. But before we get any further with Leviticus, we do have to understand a fundamental concept for the Old Testament in general, and specifically to Leviticus as it pertains to covenant relationship and what's going to be one of the things that causes a rupture in the relationship. And it's sin. And sin isn't taken just as one singular, unique word, because we have these layers to it. It's a lot like an onion, the Shrek reference, but there's layers to it. And these layers help us to understand sin in the Old Testament, and especially as it gets transposed over to the New Testament, to see in what ways is Jesus and his atonement getting worked out. But even within the Old Testament specifically, to see how atonement is worked out there on these different levels that aren't separate, but again, they're overlapping, even if they're a little bit different. So that first one is chata. Again, the way it's going to be translated is a sin, but it has the connotation of to do wrong, to bear blame or be guilty, this infraction of the law. And usually some of us are familiar with the phrase to miss the mark, and that's the representation, or that's the image of an archer as he pulls his bow back and he fires off his arrow. There's a target he's trying to reach, but he misses the mark, he misses the bullseye, he misses the target of which he's trying to reach. The problem with this specific analogy of just saying missing the mark is that it doesn't carry with it any moral connotation, which the word has. Again, that when we just say to miss the mark, the emphasis has to be on that there's something morally wrong with what's happening. It's not just simply, well, made a boo-boo, my bad, or I just made a mistake, it's all right, like I just missed what I was going for. That was it. No, but that there's moral implications to missing the mark. Again, that bearing blame or being guilty or this infraction of the law, that's the intention, that there's a standard and it was missed. And so because of that missed standard, now what we call that sin is that missing of it. That second one we have is called Pesa, and that's rebellion against the king. It's judicial, political, and there's a rupture of a relationship between the vassal and the suzerain because of that rebellion. Any of you seen any of the Pirates of the Caribbean, you'll be well familiar with the mutinies that happen. It's like almost every Pirates movie has a mutiny in it. But with it, you see this change in relationship between the two parties when rebellion happens. That there's a breach of relationship that has to be repaired. Of course, we don't really have that in Pirates, but we have, yeah, this doesn't happen in the movie. But what we're talking about here again is this breach in relationship between two parties, because specifically rebellion. Again, that's for us to get our minds around, because especially in the context of covenant, that rebellion does happen, and we saw that with Exodus 32, and we're going to see it come up again when we get to the wilderness in Numbers. So we have alone, which is that third one. It's going to be crooked or perverse, iniquity. It's bent. That there is a standard. If you want to put the, I wouldn't be in class to do this, but we don't. But we have a standard here. Say if we had two sticks, but one of them goes crooked, and so now when judged up against that standard, you can start seeing, okay, there's something off with the crooked one over here. And that's what sin is in the Old Testament, where Yahweh in his Torah sets the standard. Somewhere along the lines, humanity has their own standard and starts to get bent. And when judged against that, there's something gone awry. So there's that one. And then you have blemish, which again, these are more English terminology. That this physical ritual purity or uncleanness, which contracts diseases. That there's something impure happening that needs to be cleansed. There's burden, which is the connotation where that's where we have the word scapegoat. When somebody lays their hands, what happened is that someone will lay their hands on the animal in order to put the sin, the blame on the animal in order to have it removed. But it's this idea we're bearing the load or bearing the weight of the guilt or punishment or both. And that somebody has to bear the weight of that punishment or something has to bear the weight of that punishment. And so hopefully some of you are hearing gospel in that, and we're just talking about the Old Testament. Another one is swerving from the path, that there's a path that's been created by Yahweh, this kind of way that we should go. If you read through the Psalms, you'll see that a lot. Lead me in your way, teach me your ways. There's a way that we ought to go, but when we go on Yahweh's way, and then when we decide to kind of take an early exit, and go down a different path, that's what we have for turning aside or swerving from the path. There's moral sense of leaving the path that Yahweh's created. But there's a moral sense to what Yahweh is desiring for his people and the swerving off the path. We had seen in Exodus 32. I'm going to keep coming back to that because that's kind of the first real breach in relationship that we have between Yahweh and his people as a whole, outside of Genesis 3 and 6, 7, and other places, 10, where we see the people as a whole leaving the path that Yahweh's wanting and desired for them. That we see, hey, don't make any carved images. And what do the people do? They make carved images. And so again, that path that Yahweh has, people decide, swerve off the path. Which, again, no. And so a bit of a fun fact that Sur or Shur serves alongside Chatah to describe what really happened in the golden calf. So I had just mentioned this, that Israel does turn aside. Sure, they take that detour from the way that God commanded. So sin can be described in this way, is to get off God's track and to stray from the good path that Yahweh would have us to go. And so again, that's a sin, especially in Exodus 32, is to get off that path that Yahweh's desiring for us to go. But there's a few responses to sin, which is what Leviticus is all about. Again, that Leviticus exists for the purposes of maintaining relationship, and all the rituals and rites exist for the purposes of maintaining covenant relationship between Yahweh and his people. And so sacrifice and offerings do provide the means of approaching the Lord in his place. That we can't just, there isn't just this overarching way that people can just approach however they want. There's not really this, in our modern sense, this kind of come as you are kind of deal that Yahweh has with the people. That the approach is important, and how the people understand themselves in the context of the relationship with Yahweh will have certain ramifications that are given detail in Leviticus, which again, we find with sacrificial code and Levitical codes and stuff like that. And so what it's also going to do is maintain presence by preserving the purity and holiness of the sanctuary. And again, I bring up holiness, and I'm going to bring it up again in a few minutes as we start to flesh out what it means. And the English term offering, which again is another response to sin, comes from refers to this presentation of a gift. So the broader term, it's broader than what we take for sacrifice, which means to sacrifice something sacred. Again, sacrifice, sacred. But to offer something means to bring forth a gift. And so there's a gift offered in order to make reparations. And sometimes we kind of do that today. That guys, if you get your girlfriend significant other upset, and like with girls, if you get your boyfriend or significant other upset, if you've done something to hurt them, usually we provide them a gift to kind of not necessarily use this gift to try to make it better, but to show either some kind of contriteness or to offer a gift to make amends for it. So again, the same kind of similar situation is happening, is that a gift is offered in order to make amends and to show and to demonstrate contriteness for breaching the relationship. And so sacrifices help to maintain the relationship that is built on covenants. But I do need to bring this up because it's really important that God always maintains the right to accept offerings. The Yahweh makes the decision to forgive. The Yahweh always maintains the decision to forgive because, mind you, there's going to be times prior to that where Yahweh is going to forgive the sin of the people, and if you could think that before sacrificial system would have meant to forgive, and again, that what we're seeing with Jacob and his sons, Jacob and his sons, and then with Joseph and his brothers, that there's no sacrificial system necessarily in place, but that this kind of forgiveness of sin still does happen. And even if you think in Genesis 3, that there's really no sacrificial system specifically there, but we still see God covering the human shame. And so what sacrificial system does in Leviticus, again, is this demonstration between God and the people to make for renewed or restored relationship. And so kind of what I spelled out before to move on is with Sinai and the patriarchs, that with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, those are the covenants that everything's going to be built on. You know, that reference that what the covenant of Sinai spells out is this kind of nation that Yahweh intends Israel to be, that it's a people both with privilege of being Yahweh's chosen, but then also having to bear the weight of responsibility of what does it mean to be in covenant relationship with Yahweh, that they have both. You have a privilege and you have a responsibility. That having Yahweh as their God means that they're going to be conformed, this calling to be conformed to his holy character of being holy because Yahweh is holy, to be just because Yahweh is just, to be merciful because Yahweh is merciful. Again, to behave in these kinds of ways that is representative and reflective of their God. Which again, if we're thinking back to Genesis 1, that what it means to be made in the image of God is to be a person who reflects the God to whom they belong to, which is Yahweh. That to be a reflection of Yahweh in the world. And so that Sinai covenant, the Mosaic covenant, which is the same word, just two different phrases for it, is concerned with how these people represent Yahweh in the world, to the world, and back to one another. And so the sacrificial system helps to maintain relationship between Yahweh and his people, and people with one another. And so the sacrificial system helps God stay, if you want to put it that way, with his people, even though he makes the decision to be with them, even through this kind of ruptured relationship that he has with them. And so there's going to be two sets of offerings, one for the people and then one for the priests. That for the people, that you have this spelled out in Leviticus, and I won't take too much time here, but for the people, you have this set of burnt offerings, grain offerings, peace offerings, purification offerings, and reparation offerings. But for the priests, they're going to be ordered a little bit differently, as there's going to be burnt offerings, grain offerings, purification offerings, reparation offerings, and then peace offerings. So the order is a little bit insignificant, but for the fact that what's offered for the priests is also offered for the people. So what's offered for the priests as mediators is also offered for the people, that there's not this two-tiered system between the two. And so much of what, again, Leviticus is going to walk us through are these processes of sacrifice, and with the first one being that burnt offering. And what the people were expected to do was to present their best animals, which is implied by that brief comment or command to offer an animal, this male without defect. And again, the specific demand for this male without defect, that the sacrifice was meant to be costly. It cost them something, because sin does something that is not just impactful to the relationship, but also to demonstrate that sin costs something to somebody to make reparations happen. But there are also allowances for those who are poor, and those are only able to bring a dove or a young pigeon. For families, obviously, that weren't able to necessarily make that sacrifice, that Yahweh does meet them where they're at, and to be able to provide accommodations for that. And so this specific sacrifice is distinguishable because the whole thing is laid on the altar, and so both um, are placed first in both sets of offerings, which shows its importance. And it seems like Yahweh seems to love him some barbecue. It's an aroma that's pleasing to or for the Lord. Again, with the animal being offered up. So I'm looking at something that's in heaven here. So only those. So the next one, the grain offering. So this is the only offering that does not involve animals. That this is similar to a burnt offering, and it's intended to make Yahweh happy. That is only a portion is given to the people. And you might ask why? Because most of the grain is being offered to the priests in order to recognize them for their service to the people and also to God in the temple. So the next one is the peace offering, and it doesn't involve the whole animal. Only certain portions are set aside, and so you have the fat and the kidneys that are on the altar, and some of the other the drumsticks or the legs are given over to the priests, and some are other portions that are given to other priests. And this is often called the fellowship offering, and this is again the recognition and establishment of peace between Yahweh and His people, which is usually called the shalom offering or the peace offering. And so, let me get through these last couple of two. That this purification, that again, the emphasis specifically for this one is going to be on blood that is going to be shed, that is used to cleanse sacred items within the tabernacle. That blood cleanses the sacred items in the tabernacle. That it's used to either expiate, cleanse, atone items from sin. So again, it's important for us to recognize what is going on here, specifically in regards to the shedding of blood that forgives sin or atones for sin. And we'll talk about it when we get to the Day of Atonement, but this is going to be really important for us to understand is the link between blood, the shedding of blood, and atonement. And again, we'll talk about it when we get there. And then reparation, that it uses a ram, and the priests are alone, and priests that are allowed to eat the meat, aside from the cholesterol parts, because Yahweh's trying to preserve them from heart issues, looking out for their LDLs and HDLs and all that fun stuff. And the sacrifice is intended to compensate God for wrongs committed against Him. And so you have the dedication of the priests that are going to happen in chapter 8, and then we're going to have, it already goes wild, already at the start of chapter 10, that you have this death of the two priests for offering strange fire. And when we have that strange fire, first let me get to Aaron as high priest. When we talk about Aaron being high priest, that what Aaron and the priesthood are going to do is provide this kind of counterpoint between himself and the altar, where Aaron and the priesthood are going to be served as mediators, where now you have the kind of the sacrifices being offered. Sorry, I'm grabbing the good book. So if you don't have it out yet, go ahead and grab it right now. I forgot to grab it. But what you have with Aaron and the priests there, as I said before, that it kind of offers the human element between the altar and the priest, is that would now how Yahweh works through providing His mediation, His mediative presence between humanity and Himself. Where just as the altar forms a kind of mediation between God seeing the sacrifice and the interaction with the sacrifice, and so God's interaction with the priests, again, serving as a kind of mediated presence, that it's the human counterpart to the altar. And so you have the ordination of the priests, which are called in the special service of Yahweh. But if you can turn in your Bibles over, I need to go to Leviticus 10. And as we're talking about strange fire, I need to talk about, because it's a little bit of a weird section that's in the midst of talking about a bunch of Levitical codes and a bunch of kind of rules and regulations, that you have this narrative that kind of just jumps out in the middle for kind of no reason. So Let me go ahead and talk through that with you guys real quick. So you can go ahead and go to Leviticus chapter 10. And go ahead and go over to okay. So chapter 10, verse 1. So now Aaron's son Nadab and Abihu each took his censer and put fire in it and laid incense on it, and they offered unholy or strange fire before the Lord, such he had not commanded them. Such as he had not commanded them. That's going to be important because something's going to come up later on. And fire came out from the presence of the Lord and consumed them, and they died before the Lord. Then Moses said to Aaron, this is what the Lord meant when he said, through those who are near me, I will show myself holy, and before all the people, I will be glorified. And Aaron was quiet. So kind of drop the mic from Yahweh there and Moses by extension. So you have these two priests that are going to offer strange fire. And it could be like, there's a few different ways to interpret this when we say strange. Guys like John MacArthur, I don't know if any of you have heard of him, are going to accuse Pentecostalism and call charismatics strange fire, an allusion to this, that it's coming from the possibility that it was fire from the wrong place, that their source wasn't supposed to be where they're taken from, but he brought it in from the outside. Or perhaps they're participating in a pagan ritual, that again, they're bringing in outside sources of worship in order to accomplish this. Or it's an attempt to enter the Holy of Holies and usurp Aaron's authority and position as high priest. That there's something going on here in the interpretation that these two gentlemen who approach and decide, hey, I want to participate, they just jump in, they go ahead and offer some fire, and then they end up getting consumed. Which brings up the question, I'm going to put this in the forum for y'all to interact with and dialogue with one another in our discussion post, which again, you'll find on Moodle right next to this lecture. That does Yahweh care how you worship? Does Yahweh care how we worship? Are we allowed to just kind of come in as however we want to do it? Or are there some specifics that Yahweh is requiring of us? And if we do have some specifics, what are they? What are some specifics that we need to abide by? And just, again, thinking pastorally, just thinking through theologically and biblically that what is going on here and the application to worship in our approach, and ought we to think more about the approaches we have in church? And because I don't know, maybe Yahweh does care, maybe he doesn't. It's kind of come as you are. Jesus might just allow for all of us to kind of just come however. But does Yahweh care how we worship? And it's a very real question. Again, a lot of things that have gone on, and we don't just mean how we sing, but our whole approach from everything we do. That does Yahweh care? And so again, I'll post it on the forum. I'll put it up for us to dialogue and discuss. So look for that. And so Yom Kippur. Now, what is Yom Kippur? This Day of Atonement. And this day specifically is for all of Israel to participate in. And so Kippur itself, which is, it's not just Kelly's last name from The Office, but then in Hebrew, it could have two different meanings, which is either to propitiate or to expiate. Propitiate, which means to please or appease or make happy. You know, like to make people happy. Is the sacrifice doing that? Or is it to expiate, to remove the sin and its effects? Which one do we go with? And so one of my professors from APU, John Hartley, has this quote, that to cleanse the sanctuary from the pollution of sin and to release the offerer from the penalty of their sinning. That's how he defines atonement, to cleanse the sanctuary from the pollution of sin. That's to remove the effects of sin and to release the offerer from the penalty of their sin. That's part of the effect, and it's also part of the appeasement that's brought in from that piece. So the atonement brought you back into good relationship with God and with the community, while also making the sinner free of guilt. That it's both restorative of human relationships to one another and restorative of human relationships back to God. Because again, that the relationship between God and humanity has now been restored. If you want to think about it this way, some people break it up. I've heard it cleverly that at one mint, that kind of reunion between God and humanity happening on the Day of Atonement through sacrifice. Again, clever. At one mint, just break the word apart, and there you go. Kind of easy to remember, but again, there's more nuances than that kind of breaking it up will give us. But it is a helpful starting point. So, what does it mean to be holy? What does it mean to be holy? And that's something that I'm gonna post on another discussion as we get through the later of the week, because it's something I do want us to wrestle with, and something for us to grapple with in the context of Lent. Sorry, in the context of Lent. What does it mean for God to be holy? What does it mean for our calling to be holy? That in Hebrew, Kodesh does not equal the Greek Hagios. And the reason I bring that up, again, there's two different meanings for it. That usually when we take holy, it means a kind of high moral standard, of one that can never be attained only by God alone. But that for especially in the Old Testament, it's described as a kind of uniqueness or distinction. I need to say it again, that holiness is a uniqueness or distinction in the midst of, not separate from. And again, what we usually understand holiness as is kind of separate. Be ye separate, or be separate from the world, without the realization that, especially in the Old Testament, what it means is that there's a distinctness about individuals, about God in the context of everything else. Again, distinct and unique from within, in the midst of, not just separate from. Because Israel's whole mission is summed up in being holy. And if they would be holy, then they would fulfill their mission to the world. But again, this desire to want to continue to capitulate and to go back will cause some issues in that. And so we're going to go ahead and finish up a little bit with clean and unclean. With clean and unclean, part of this, we can take it as ancient understandings of keeping, for one, sanitation, as we learn later on, that certain meats have to be cooked at certain temperatures in order to be beneficial for eating. Otherwise, you're at risk for getting diseases and stuff like that. But the other one is that the only cloven hoof, cud chewing animals are clean, and all other mammals are unclean. Again, part of it is sanitation. The other one is that it's dangerous to have eaten certain animals because of what their diets were and what made them dangerous. And so only fish with fins and scales are clean, and all other birds are unclean. Sorry, no catfish. And birds of prey and flying insects are unclean, and all of the birds and insects that hop are clean. No vultures, sorry, and no flies. The concept is specifically for that one, birds of prey and flying insects, is that they would eat other dead animals, and so this would make it a little bit risky for them to eat. And so, all right. And so that being said, that's gonna go ahead and wrap us up for this this lecture. That being said, again, if you go online to Moodle and for our discussion for today to answer the question that I posed earlier, does Yahweh care about our worship? And as we talk about that and talk through that, we'll bring it up again on Thursday as we continue through Leviticus. I love you guys, miss you guys. I'm praying for you all. If you have any comments, questions, concerns, email me, dpartida@lifepacific.edu. See you guys.